What's up, YouTube? Had quite a few people ask me a bunch of questions about A, tuning, B, open source, C, speed density, and D, I guess, virtual dyno, and like how to set that up and all kinds of stuff. I'll try to go a little bit. I'll try to go high level, not really too far in depth because there is quite a few videos out there, but just wanted to answer some questions. So first off, we're talking about O2 WRXs and JDM STIs, O1 JDM STIs, and so forth on to 2024 WRXs. The various tuning methods you can use that are out there, the pros and cons of each. The car behind me is a GC8 or GM6, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But it does have a WRX kind of harness from 03, I think, 02 or 03. And then it has an 05 STI motor, but I'm running a JDM ECU. So the tuning options were kind of limited to me, but I would have chosen the option that I chose even if I had all the options available. So we'll go over those options. There's three, and we'll start off with the first one, which is the one that's well known to everyone, the Cobb access port, Cobb, right? So if you're not aware, Cobb started off, and I'm old, so I was back in this day. Cobb started off with ECU tuning, and it was a little bit more different, a little bit different back then. I had an 02 or 03 WRX when it first came. It was brand new. I bought it brand new, and I put a VF34 on it, STI pinks, kind of crazy shit. And then to get it tuned, it was no big tuners back in 03, 04. Especially in my area. So I sent it to my ECU to Cobb. I literally took the ECU out, mailed it to them, and my car just sat there for 3 weeks until they mailed it back to me with the map on it. So obviously things have come a long way, but we know Cobb now as the giver of access ports, right? The little device that shows us the data and allows us to flash maps. And I haven't had an access port since I think like the V2. I think I had a V2 in like 2010 or so. But either way, you're basically paying for the cable. The device, the little access port, is really just a laptop, right? The laptop is being sent data from the cable, and we'll go into that in just a sec on why I just think you're paying for the cable. The access port, $600, $700, I don't know what they are now. It's convenient. It's just plug and play. Tuner sends you a map, or you go to get it tuned. Most tuners have the race tuner software. Pretty convenient there, just to plug it in. Also, you can keep it in your car. You can see live data. It'll show you live data. Also, a big pro for it in that regard. Most know how to tune with it. It's, again, plug and play, and you can kind of keep it in your car. It's kind of convenient. Those are the two pros. Cons, again, kind of expensive, $600, $700. Maybe you can buy one used, but still kind of expensive. B, another con, is that some people keep it in their car, some people don't. It could get stolen, right? You may be worried, my access port's going to get stolen. Probably not a big con for most people. Maybe keep it in your glove box, lock it up, whatever. Three, bigger con for me is that, and we'll go into this a little bit more later, but you can't really see what's going on underneath the hood, right? So if you get a map sent to you, you have no idea what's on that map. You're just flashing that map. You're not going to be able to dig into that map and see what the tuner changed. You're just going to take his word for it, shove that fucker on, and hope to God it doesn't blow up. Not to say that there's tuners out there who are going to blow your car up with the Cobb access port. Obviously, they've probably gone through training or paid for a license to get the race tuner, the Cobb software, so they know what they're doing. I just prefer to see what steps are being taken in each individual revision, so I can, if I wanted to, learn or just see the tuner's mindset on certain things, right? The other thing is that there's green speed happening right now. Everyone's probably aware of that. Green speed means for cars with secondary air pumps, you can't delete them. For TGVs, very hard to delete those. Making an exhaust catalyst can't. So some tuners won't even tune for that. There's no real way around that. Maybe there's a way, I'm not sure. But for the most part, most Cobb tuners sending you a Cobb map can't use the race tuner software to go around those emission standards that green speed is set. So you're kind of fucked on that. Not to say that I would ever go catless, ever, but I don't have TGV deletes, or I don't have TGVs. This car didn't come with them. or a secondary air pump. So I would just have to worry about the catalyst stuff. But either way, some people, like, you may be able to get more power with those mods without, it's debatable. Some people say you can, some people say you can't. But either way, you can't do it with Cobb, so you don't even have a choice. So that's Cobb, right? So went over Cobb. Second, standalone. Standalone is what probably most people confuse with the last option, which is open source. But standalone is going to be your haltechs, your link ECUs, the things that you would put in place of your ECU that take over the duties that the ECU would do. Cons, very expensive for the most part. I mean, they're going to be pretty expensive. Your haltechs are your most known ones. They can get up to $2,000, $3,000. Then you have to, another con, you have to wire stuff in, right? You have to wire that ECU in. So you're going to wire in possibly new sensors. You can wire in crazy sensors if you want and add more parameters, but you're still having to do a lot of wiring. For some people, that's a major turnoff. And the price, obviously, is a major turnoff too. And then you have to find tuners that like to use those standalones. Obviously, most tuners should be able to do that, but maybe some prefer the accessport or open source. So that's standalone. I think standalone is kind of fading off. I don't think it's as needed. I know it's still needed, but I don't think a lot of people still use haltechs or things of that sort with the availability of the last option, which is open source. And this is something that I think people get confused on a lot and think, A, like you have to be really technically savvy to do open source, or B, it costs a lot of money, or C, I can't do it with this car. My car's too new or too old. Open source, you need to run open source, you need a Tactrix cable, which is why I said Cobb, you're really just paying for the cable. The accessport is really just a laptop in smaller form. The cable is what's sending the data to that, right? So you're basically paying for that. You need the Tactrix cable, which I'll post a link in the description. I think I bought mine for like $160. They may have gone up to like $180 or $200, but they're $200. That's your investment, is $200. And then you need a laptop to plug into. A Windows laptop is preferable, but you can use a MacBook and then like kind of simulate Windows if you are technically savvy. If not, then just a Windows laptop. I use a laptop, a Sony Vaio from 2005. It's 20 years old. It's a piece of crap, but it does what I need it to do. 32-bit or 64-bit Windows operating system. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter. If you have Windows Vista or Windows XP, I think it would even work on, or newer, you're good to go. Most people are going to have at least Windows 7, I would imagine, even from back in like 2005. I mean, so that's basically all you need is the laptop and the cable. You should already have a laptop, or you can pick one up on Facebook Marketplace for like $20. They're stupid cheap. You don't need anything crazy, right? Just a laptop. Plug the cable in, and then you need 2 pieces of software. And this is where I think it starts to get scary for some people, but you would need EcuFlash, which is the the program that sends data to the ECU to flash it or to pull a ROM off of the ECU. So basically the flashing data, that's EcuFlash. And then you would need Romraider. Romraider is a logger. So basically what it is, it's showing you what an accessport would show you on the little screen, but way more parameters are available and you can see everything on your laptop screen and you can log it to a log file very, very easily. The setup of those 2 files, I'm not gonna lie, can get complex. And when I say complex, you have to download some stuff and put it into certain folders. It's not like crazy. You can look that up. If I need to make a video on that, please let me know. But it's pretty easy to do. You can literally Google, EcuFlash. How do I set it up for an 02 WRX? And you'll get something on Naziok or on YouTube. It's really easy to do. My goal here is to just go over the various options and then tell why I think some are better than others. So then you have the Pro is $200 for the cable, and that should be it. You may have a laptop, you may not. We'll say $250 because you need a $50 laptop. So $250, it's cheap. Another Pro, everyone that does accessports, I guarantee, I have yet to meet a tuner that'll be like, I won't tune open source, I only do accessports. Like they'll do open source. If they can't do open source, there's something wrong with them because it's the tuning software is very similar to the accessport race or the race tuner software. It's not too far away from that. You should be able to tune open source. It's not like only certain tuners can do it. Everyone can do it. I haven't met one yet. And some actually prefer it, I think, to the Cobb accessport software. So that's another pro. Most tuners can do it. A con would be, the only con that I can really think of is that you're carrying your laptop in the car with you if you want to log. So with the accessport, you have that little screen right next to you, right, that you can kind of see and pull up your 6 or 8 parameters that you want to see on the screen. Readily convenient. Laptop, obviously, you're having off to the side of the seat. Buddy's holding it, maybe yelling out numbers to you or something. It's a little bit less convenient in that regard. But you're able to log to file. And what that means is, same thing with the accessport. I think it has this ability now, regardless of whether it does or not. You can log, you can just go out on a run, log, and then come back and look at that log, right? So you can see or pull over and look at it. Don't ever look at your laptop while you're driving. I would never do that. But it does look cool. Like a Honda Civic with a laptop, people get scared when they see it. Either way, so that's another pro to it, I guess. The open source tuning for me, I've been doing it for about 12 years now, as opposed to any other option, is again cheaper and just I get more adjustability, or I can see more, right? Even if I don't use it, I have the ability to do it. To me, it's like comparing that an Android phone to an iPhone. The Cobb accessport is the iPhone, right? It's got one button. You really are limited in what you can do. You can't really fuck anything up, right? The open source, not to say that you can easily fuck things up. You could, but you'd have to be pretty dumb to do it. But you get all this customization and availability to parameters that you couldn't necessarily see before. Also, you're not limited by what Apple says you can do. Android, if you wanted to, again, you could download apps that you made or apps that it says are not trustworthy. You could do that if you wanted to. Just like with green speed, you can't do stuff on the Cobb. They're telling you what you can and can't do. So it's up to you. With that said, though, with the JDM option I have behind me, I have a JDM motor and a JDM ECU. I have no option but open source. Cobb does not do JDM ECUs, so it was either open source or standalone. And I do not want to do standalone. I don't think I need it at this point. I see the reason for it. I just don't think I've met those criteria. I don't have a crazy build to where I would need, all those sensors and what. It can clean up the engine bay too. I will say that it can clean up the engine bay quite a bit. I don't think it's worth $3,000 to do that. And finding a tuner that wants to tune, a haltech. So that's that. All right. So that's the tuning. Right. So we go over that. Obviously, I'm preaching open source. So you can look more into that if you want to do it. Pretty easy. Next is tuning and what I do to tune. Right. There's a couple different methods here. We'll say three different tuning methods. Most you'll see when people put their YouTube videos online, with the exception of mine apparently, they're taking it to the dyno and they're like, here's the tuner, putting it on the dyno and giving it a fucking rip. I would never do that. Personally, I see the benefit of it. It's debatably safer depending on how they hook up the car, but sometimes you're running at speeds of like over 100 miles an hour on a dyno. It's stationary, something goes wrong, car goes through it. Granted, again, it's probably safer than the method that I use, but also it just doesn't feel like the correct environment for the car, right? You're forcing air to make it seem like, if you have a top mount, front mount, the air is coming through. You're trying to simulate that, right? It's not the same. It's not the same as driving on the street, on the stretch of road that you would normally take to dog the piss out of your car, or the track that you would take. It's sitting stationary. It is good for getting numbers because you do get numbers. Bad part about those numbers, they can be fabricated. If you don't set up the dyno correctly, those numbers could be elevated drastically or lower drastically. Or is it a Mustang dyno, or is it a dyno jet? Those numbers could vary by 20 to 30%. So those numbers literally mean jack shit to me. I mean, they're close. Don't get me, everyone's going to be like, I tuned mine or calibrated mine perfectly, so I know my numbers are great. And then you go to another dyno down the street, and the numbers are who they calibrated perfectly are 20% different. And you're like, what the hell's going on? So they are good to get like a base number or to see variance, but that's not my preference in terms of tuning. The other two methods that I have done and which I prefer, one is road tuning. And road tuning, not as safe. Because you're doing it on the road, you're speeding on, you're probably going at speeds above the speed limit to make sure the car is acting as it would on the road, right? So that's the downside of that, not as safe. Obviously, if you're tuning close to your house, which you should be, you would know roads that are better for doing those sorts of things. Not that I would ever condone speeding. I don't speed ever, but I know people who do. So I prefer that because it's less of a simulated experience and more of a real experience. The good news is most people that dyno tune vehicles, hopefully, will also take it on a road tune and make sure that the drivability on the road hasn't changed from the simulated experience that is the dyno that we were just shooting for them numbers. So if they don't take it on the road and you get a dyno tune, if they just dyno tune it and they're like, here you go, and they're just like one of those shops that just like dyno, and just every car get off the dyno, we need another car on the dyno. That's not the kind of shop that you want to go to. If you want to do a dyno tune, I know everyone wants numbers, at least get it road tuned. The third option, which is kind of the same as road tuning, which is what I do, is e-tuning. E-tuning is the same as a road tune, but as opposed to your tuner being there in the car with you and seeing all the data, it is you logging the data, the same data that they would see, and then based off the parameters they give you, and then sending them via emails. They look at the logs. Based off the logs, they see, hey, this is, pulling timing here, or running lean here, or not hitting enough boost here, and send you revisions accordingly. You flash those maps, and then you go through the process again. Typically, for me, it's about a 10 to 12 revision process. Sometimes it's been as low as 5, but this is on flex tunes, so if you're running E85, you have to start off with 92 and then work your way to E85. If you're just doing a 92 octane or an E85 tune, probably be like 5 or 6 revisions. Pretty easy depending on the tuner. So either way, I suggest going on the road and driving your car safely, but also feeling it. Because again, if you're dyno tuning the car, I know everyone wants those numbers, and I'm going to show in a sec how you can get those numbers using a tuning software called Virtual Dyno. A lot of e-tuners use Virtual Dyno. A lot of tuners like that tune on dynos that on the side will e-tune use Virtual Dyno, and will admit that it's if set up correctly, very, very, very close to the average dyno, within 2 to 3% of an average dyno. And for your dyno numbers, a lot of people want those numbers to scream, I have blank horsepower, because that looks good, especially on the title of the YouTube video or on your Instagram. But what you should basically be doing is looking for the change from one to the other. So a starting dyno and then an ending dyno to make sure the modifications that you did, the tune that you got, was worth it, right? Like I added turbo and I got 20 horsepower. That's weird. So again, you want to see those changes. It should be less about, this is my final number, and more about this is where I started and this is where I came. Because those final numbers may be bloated in some way. So if you start off with bloat and you end with more bloat, you at least have a change in the bloat, right? Obviously, again, getting 400 horsepower, 350 horsepower is great, but those numbers are great. But for me, again, it's more about the change. I love seeing those numbers. I love hitting a certain number. That does sound great. But for me, again, it's more about the car running healthy and less about those numbers and just seeing the change that we went from one to the other. Okay. Last thing, before I go show a little bit of my computer from 2005, I know this is dragging on, is speed density. So another question I got was, I can't set up speed density because I don't want to run standalone. You don't have to run standalone to do speed density. You can do it on Cobb, you can do it on open source, you can do it on anything, right? So I run open source, obviously. What is speed density? Speed density, quick and easy. Get this puppy down. This is a mass airflow sensor. This is what most Subarus use, with the exception, I think, of like 98 to 2001 Subaru models. I think there were more, but I know those Impreza models, like the NA models, used a MAP-based system, and we'll go into that in just a sec. But this is a mass airflow sensor. You can kind of see here, we see a little like eyedrop or tearlet there. that is going to be where the air intake temperature is taken, right here, this little, and then this part right here, that is inside there. You will see a little metal filament. I don't know if the camera's going to pick it up, but either way, this larger part going up in there is where the airflow is measured. So airflow measured here, intake air temperature here. And what that does is that, I'll show you on my car now, what that does is it goes right here. You'll see that on most cars. I have mine deleted, obviously, but it'll measure the air coming in right here before it's charged via the turbo, cooled via the intercooler, regardless of your setup, and your blow-off valve, if you have one, releasing that air into the atmosphere. So the problem with this, the pros and cons, the pro is mass airflow is pretty accurate in terms of it's not doing calculations. It's giving you that data, and you can do it from there. The map base, which is what I have here, or speed density, uses a pressure sensor, which I got from Cobb for about $160 that plugs right in. It's a 4-bar map sensor. And then the intake air temperature sensor, which will be replaced from the mass airflow sensor. Those two items are doing calculations to calculate the mass airflow coming in. It's not quite as accurate, but it is accurate in the sense of at least air temperature and pressure coming in, right? Because this is right before the throttle body, or right before it goes into the actual engine. Here, if you have a mass airflow sensor, it's before everything has occurred. So if you have leaks, obviously your car is going to run like shit. Not saying that your car won't run bad if you have leaks with this system. You just won't notice them as much because everything is measured here as opposed to earlier. It's actually maybe a little bit more difficult to feel out leaks with a speed density setup, but a little vacuum leak here or there. I've had a vacuum leak before. Don't get me wrong, they're not good, but they shouldn't kill the motor, right? It shouldn't be something where the car just dies because you have a small vacuum leak. This will kind of prevent that. A lot of people do both, though. Run mass airflow and speed density. They run in a hybrid system. So basically, they run this at lower RPMs, the mass airflow, and then they run speed density at higher RPMs. Just easier for the pressure and the maxing out of the MAF sensor. It's just easier that way. I run it all the way. I'm a full speed density. I have no problems with drivability. It runs great. And it gives me the ability to run a blow-off valve because the air that's being let off here is before it's seen by the intake air temperature sensor and the pressure sensor. So it's none the wiser. If you run a blow-off valve with a MAF sensor, you're going to run rich in between shifts. So that's speed density in a nutshell. Obviously, 160 for the 4-bar with the plug and play, just literally plugs right in. And then the intake air temperature sensor, I bought an AEM 2014, which is a 1/8 MPT, and bought a little coupler to put it in. I didn't want to weld. So then I just wired in the 2 wires from the MAF. Literally, it goes around. You can see that cable that goes around there. That is literally just 2 wires that instead of getting the intake air temperature sensor or intake air temp from the MAF sensor, it now gets it from that, and you're done. Then you just need to tune. Quick and easy, speed density, like how it's done. Okay, so this is an example of comparing the 2 ROMs. To flash the ROMs, well, I mean, it's pretty easy. You would just, once you load a ROM in, once you open a ROM, you would just hit, and this is on EcuFlash, you would just hit write currently loaded ROM to EcuFlash memory, and then the OK button with the cable connected to the OBD2 port, and then you're off and away. Very easy stuff. I'm not really going to go into that. There's other ways or how-tos on how to do that. It's pretty easy. What I'm looking at here is comparing 2 ROMs. So this is a version 12. This is a version 12-1. Basically, the difference is here. I told my tuner, I said, tune's great. I just have some issues with cold start on E85. There's ways that you can go around that. I could even do this myself, but I paid the guy, so I was like, hey, go ahead and give me like some, inject your pulse width on the cold cranking or something. And I'm sure that's what he probably did, but let's compare the 2 ROMs. So I'm hitting the compare button. And then if I scroll down here, it will show me exactly what has changed. So I have between the 2 ROMs, the cranking fuel injector pulse width A and C and the mid primary base enrichment has differences for these two tables as well. So if I go to those two tables, we scroll down here on version 12, they'll actually be highlighted in blue. And then I could actually see what has been done. So this one, let's look at this one, the fuel cranking right here. This is the version 12. And then if I go to version 12.1, which is what was changed, we can see the differences. Scroll down here, pretty easy right here. Check that box, and you can see the differences between the two. Obviously, the cranking pulse width has been changed quite a bit. Probably about, looks like about 20% or so. They've changed that. But this is the kind of thing that you can do with open source, right? You could see these changes easily, as opposed to the accessport where someone's giving you a map and you're just doing it, right? And the ability to tune it yourself. I've added some things to my specific tune that I'm not suggesting that everyone should do this. Again, don't touch this if you don't know what you're doing. Don't change things. But I'm at the point where I could pretty much tune my own map. I still pay for it, and then I'm able to talk with the tuner, let him know that I'm trying to learn as well. So I'm going to go through his tunes and be like, why did you change this? Is there a specific reason you changed this? I would have done this, but, you know, and they'll, if they're kind, they'll go back and forth with you. But I've changed things, a couple things. One, I added launch control to mine. And the reason being is because I had launch control on another map, so it's pretty basic to set up. It's just enabling it and enabling the RPM, and then the mode, and then the static fuel timing, or the ignition timing, excuse me. Pretty easy stuff to do. Don't do that though. Have your tuner add launch control. They can do it. He could have done this for free, but I just knew what I was doing, so I added it in. And then I added the Knox cell enable on mine, and it shows disabled here, but this isn't my map, the map that I'm using now. I just want to see knock show as a cell, as a check engine light. So I added that. I would rather know right away if I'm experiencing knock. If you have an accessport, you may be able to see your fine learning knock. But with this, I'm not carrying my laptop around with me all the time. So I just enabled the cell. So I'll know to check the cell. If I see a cell, it'll be blinking, and then to kind of go from there. So those two things. This is the stuff that you can do though with open source. You could change anything you wanted to, right? Like there's no lift to shift here. There's obviously flex fuel. I'm running flex fuel. There's alcohol injection. This is a certain ROM. You may not have all these abilities, but you do have quite a few that you can go through and change. So, I mean, it is huge what you have the ability to update in the ECU with open source. And this is what we were talking about with like hybrid mode. So this is like the MAF speed density blending that I referred to. So I'm just full on speed density, but if I want to change this, I could go to mass airflow, or I could go to a blend, as you see there. So both. Pretty cool stuff. Let's go back to speed density. Let's close this out. And yeah, this is operating on a very, very old computer. But that's all you need really to do. And the amount of stuff that you can see and look at and do, if you want to learn or if you don't, is... Okay, so lastly is virtual dyno. We're going to go over this real quick. Setup is pretty easy, but some people get it wrong, and I just want to make sure that we're doing the right things here so you can get, accurate numbers. Again, we're going for not just what our final numbers are, but the comparison between two, right? So this is virtual dyno version 1.8.6. I think they're up to like 1.9 now. I don't think they even like updated anymore, but I think they ended at like 1.9. You're good with like version 1.5 or above. It's not really too much variation between that. So, but I use 1.8.6 just because that's what was on this computer at the time. So what we're going to do first is the car editor. You want to hit File, Car Editor, and this is where you're going to add your vehicle in. Most of you can just use the generic Subaru one down here. So Subaru, STI, it has various ones. And when you do that, it'll have the drag coefficient, the frontal area, it'll have all that ready, right? And the gears that you're going to do your pulls in, which is third or fourth for that. I do technically would qualify more for this because my transmission is this 2004 to 2006. It's a JDM STI transmission version 8, but it's a 2005 one. But either way, I just took these same numbers, those gear 3 and gear 4, and went up here and made a custom one. So basically what you can do is, I have a custom one here, but you could edit this one and then save as custom. And we can go into that real quick. Custom Subaru GC8, which is my car, and I put 2004 or 2006 GC8 even though that's not possible, but my car is an amalgam of many cars. So what I did here, obviously titled it. The weight, very important, right? So the weight is going to be the weight of the vehicle without you in it, is what I do. So without me in it. Mine weighs about 2780, 2790, but I bring a battery box with me because my laptop is not... can't run without being plugged in, so I have to bring like a big battery box that weighs 30 pounds. My laptop is not light, and then I also sometimes bring in the fuel cans for the 85, just because I go kind of sometimes so far away just to do the run. So I add in a good 60 pounds here, but you want to be as accurate as possible with that. The next is the drag coefficient and the frontal area. Those two you can just look up for your vehicle. Obviously, they didn't have GC8s in the car editor here. They don't have those by default. You probably won't be running a GC8, but if you are, these are the drag coefficient and frontal areas that you should be using. I looked these up, verified these. These are the drag coefficients and frontal areas that we have for like a RS25 or a GC8, if you will. That is correct. And then the tire diameter, you don't really need to do that now, right? Because I'll show you why in a sec. You don't need to do that. And then the gear ratio, you can, if you don't know what your gear ratios are, you can look up for Subaru transmissions. You can look up, there are various websites where you can get the gear ratios for third and fourth gear and then your final gear. Then you would save as custom and then go from there. So now what you can do is you can use, I made a profile. I just call this one new profile 37. I guess that's what it's generically saved as. Then I edit that profile. And once I edit it, I set the car as the one that I just made, right? So I set the car to that. Set it to third gear. Obviously the weight, well, we already set, but you can set it again. The final drive you don't need to set because you already set that. Then the occupant weight. Maybe you have a passenger in with you. I actually lost some weight, so I'm closer to like 185 now. But 200 is what I put in for the occupant weight. Again, you want to put in your weight. And then the tire height, I told you you needed that because you can actually calculate that here, right? So you can, 225, 45, 17 is like your older STI models. I'm actually running, so a little bit different, 245, 40, 17s for the winter. This is what I run. This is my winter tire setup. So that's a slight variation tire height, which will change horsepower numbers, and I'll show you that in a sec. So I got the profile saved. Once you save the profile and use the profile, then whenever you load up a run, which you data log a run that you would send to your tuner, and then I send it to myself as well so I can look at this dyno to see what it's doing. I'll use my latest one here. It'll load up with that profile set, so you're just going to see the numbers, right? So we're seeing 417 and 356 here. Again, if I added in the wrong tire diameter, so let's do 245, 45. This is what I run for my summer setup, or track setup. That's what I run there. And then if I click this right here, it'll update. You can see the horsepower went up to 426. So the horsepower actually went up. It was only like, 1 or 2%. But that is, let's go back to 245. 40, 17. That's significant, right? So for some people that may be significant. So let's go back down, let it update. So 417 is what I have. Obviously, if you add in like 400 pounds here, if you add like more weight, the more weight that you add, the more it's going to think horsepower your car has because you were pushing it further, right? So now it says 456 because I weigh 500 pounds, which I do not. Granted, you can put a passenger in there, so on and so forth. So that 417 is where I'm at. The other thing to update would be the SAE here, which is if you check this box, it's going to run, you can get the air temp and then the barometric pressure, which I think we were right around this day. We were right around 29, but the temperature was much lower. The temperature was about 50. So if I do that, you can see the horsepower goes down even more, right? It goes down to 408. So, but this is accurate. Oh, I just zoomed in regrettably. Let me zoom out. There we go. Oh man, I did something terrible there. I don't know. I didn't even know you could use a scroll wheel on this. That is bad. Okay, so the graph looks small. Let's highlight this. There we go. So 408 and 349, this will actually show your boost too. I hit 23 pounds of boost, 23.5. This is like my kill map. This is the crazy map. The other one, if I put in like the 20 pound or 21 pound map, that one is closer to, on these SAE numbers, around 390, 400, close to that, right around that range. And then AFRs, I run a steady like low 11, a low to mid 11. It's going to run a little bit richer right now. Hopefully it'll, because the E85 that I'm running, I'm only running E70, but that you can see those numbers there. Also, you can go through on Virtual Dyno and graph. See how it says graph other columns. You can go through and you can graph. Let me pull this down. You can graph individual things that were in this log as well. So these are all the things that I was logging. You can log I log my wideband, so I can log that. See at various points what it's at. The highest it went up to was 11.7. Yeah, for 85, that's very good. That's kind of what you want. Mid 11s is kind of perfect. You can log intake air temperature sensor, which along this was just 68. It looks like throughout. Again, pretty cold intake air temperature sensor, and then you can see, like, let's look at my ethanol content. This is my ethanol content. So 77 ethanol content right here, and then various stuff like the knock, the fine learning knock correction, 0. So you can kind of see that stuff in more graph form. You have to set this up right, or you're not going to get good numbers, or you're going to get crazy numbers. But the bigger thing is, once you set it up, you can use, I use DynoJet, you can use virtual dynos, you can use Mustang Dyno. There's variations here. Let me load that. There's various ones you can use. It doesn't matter. Obviously, Mustang Dyno, if I do that, it's going to lower the numbers quite a bit, because it's like the lowest running dyno there is. But with that said, this is within 2 to 3%, and we're going for changes from one to the other, right? So I was at, with this exact same setup, if I go to loading my runs, hold on, if I go to the previous one, let's go to the previous one. Here we go. This is before I did my turbo upgrade, E85, but before I did my turbo upgrade. This would, if it loads forever, this will show you the variation between, right? So it's loaded. It's the exact same parameters. Besides the SAE, this should be about, I did this, and this was about 60 degrees when I did this run. So it'll come down a little bit, but we're looking at the variance between, right? So regardless of the dyno that we're specifically using, if one number is wrong, they're both going to be wrong. We're looking at, the boost to see that I'm actually running lower boost on this red one, right? The newer one, and I'm getting more horsepower, a lot more. So we went from 340 to about 408. So it's like a 68 horsepower jump at the peak, but I didn't lose power anywhere. I just gained horsepower and torque throughout the range. Just an excellent modification, but you can look at that mod. I won't go into that. That was another video. But this is virtual dyno and how to set that up. You kind of have to set that up right, or else you're not going to get great numbers there. So